Welcome to the Ready for Merge podcast, the podcast about what code changes are being merged into Ethereum and Bitcoin Core. Thanks for joining the show. I'm your host, Christine D. Kim, and today we are going to be getting into some Bitcoin protocol developments as well as some Ethereum protocol developments, as per usual. On the Bitcoin side, I've got two PRs to talk about on the show today. They were recently merged into Bitcoin Core from the benchmarking working group. So we're going to talk about what those code changes were. I've also, on the Ethereum side, I want to talk about the Hegota headliners, the new major features that could be included into the Ethereum upgrade after Glamsterdam. I know I want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of discussion lately on Ethereum's layer 2 scaling roadmap, but this is not the show. We're going to go into that. There's still a lot of discussion, information that's happening. I still need some time to digest. But I probably will comment on all that's going on there at some point, either in my newsletter or on this show, but it's not going to be today. So let's talk about Hegota today because that's still very relevant and very timely. Today is actually the deadline for Ethereum Hegota headliner proposals. I'm going to get started with Bitcoin updates today. Bitcoin updates go first today because we're going to get those out of the way. It should be quick, and then we'll start talking about Ethereum developments. So on the Bitcoin side, I probably have mentioned on the show before that Bitcoin core development primarily occurs through working groups. And these working groups represent different goals and projects that Bitcoin core developers are prioritizing for implementation. And these working groups, they don't really have a timeline for, many of them don't have a timeline for completion. They're really just a concrete development goal, a change or an improvement that developers want to make to the Bitcoin Core protocol. And there's leaders for these working groups that give updates every single Thursday on the Bitcoin Core Development Thursday meetings that happened over IRC, the Internet Relay Chats that I cover weekly through the BTC Before Light newsletter. But many of these working groups, and ever since I started covering Bitcoin development on a weekly basis, which was since last fall, um, yeah, I've noticed that a lot of them eventually become archived and kind of inactive over time as Bitcoin. Because the Bitcoin developer community is very amorphous, as developers come and go, certain initiatives just kind of fall by the wayside because there isn't really sustained interest or support in getting that initiative done. Right now, there is about 6 active working groups where there are a certain amount of Bitcoin developers working on those goals, and they are giving active updates on what's happening. Um, One of those active working groups, called the Benchmarking Working Group, has been particularly busy as of late. And as just for context, as the name suggests, the working group is focused on benchmarking the various operations of Bitcoin nodes, benchmarking their performance and trying to find ways to make uh, Bitcoin nodes more efficient, especially during the initial sync process. So to that end, one of the working group leaders, I hope I'm saying his name right, Laurenk, I think is the pseudonym that he goes by. He recently merged 2 PRs related to the benchmarking efforts. And I want to talk about what those PRs are on the show because though they're minor, it is a good indication of how, believe it or not, the Bitcoin core code base does change on a week to week basis, and small changes do add up over time. So the 2 PRs that I'm going to talk about are PR 34253 and PR 34207, both related to benchmarking efforts. And none of these, of course, are consensus breaking. Otherwise, you probably would have heard about it more on social media or news articles. Not many news sites, I would say, cover the small nuanced changes that are happening on the code base. But on this show, this is what you're getting. Um, It's not really something that even node operators are likely to even notice when these code changes get bundled into the next major Bitcoin Core release, Bitcoin V31. But it's worth talking about what they do on a high level. So PR 34207, um, the enforce get coin returns only unspent coins. That's the description of the PR. Basically, what this PR does is it tightens the specifications for the get code get coin function, so that that function strictly returns unspent coins. Bitcoin has a UTXO set, which is just like a list of all the Bitcoins that have not yet been spent and can be uh, transacted with on chain. And it doesn't change any kind of node behavior, but the reason why developers made this change is because they want to ensure that when they're testing for this function, um, all of the edge cases that are associated with the function are narrowed down to really just the return value of unspent coins. And it also strengthens various assumptions that developers can make through the process of testing when they're reasoning about the various kind of like returns that they'll get from this function. So at a high level, it just kind of clarifies and straightens up the language um, around the get coin function and ensures that it really only does this one thing. The second one, PR 34253, cache tip recency for lock free is initial block download. As I say this, it all sounds like mumbo jumbo, and the descriptions, it really takes a lot of decoding. But don't worry, I already did that heavy lifting. So this PR, it basically updates how a Bitcoin node verifies that it has actually finished downloading and validating the prior block. And it makes that process a bit more reliable and ensures that verifying when the node has finished downloaded and verifying the prior block, that process doesn't become a blocker to other critical node operations. So it's the way that Lauren describes it in the PR description. It's primarily a PR that's going to help with future benchmarking work, especially again around the work for speeding up initial node syncs, which Bitcoin developers called IBD, the initial block download phase. And yeah, both PRs, they don't change consensus rules, and they're minor ones that will primarily help progress the other PRs that are still open for Bitcoin Core's benchmarking efforts. Um, and as I've been tracking Bitcoin Core development, these kinds of PRs are by far the most frequent ones. And however small they are changing Bitcoin. And kind of far from Bitcoin being an ossified technology, it is a technology that requires constant maintenance and optimization. And that is what Bitcoin Core developers are continuing to do, even if it's not widely reported on or discussed. And also the kind of mechanisms, the discussions that happen on the IRC chats, all the ways that coordination for these smaller code changes gets done. These are the muscles that are flexed and put to use. These are the same ones, even when the code changes get larger and more significant. The larger code changes can only get done in Bitcoin because there's constantly these small code changes that are happening in the in between periods of, I don't know, Bitcoin forks, which, happen very rarely, um, only every couple of years. But there's some big forks coming up, I'd say, especially around the conversation for Bitcoin's quantum resistance. But we're not going to really go into post quantum discussions on this episode, but maybe a future episode. So, yeah, that was the quick Bitcoin Core Protocol update for my listeners for this week's biweekly brief. Those are the two most recent code changes that were merged into Bitcoin Core. That's what they do, and kind of the continuing significance behind tracking these kinds of developments with Bitcoin Core. Let's talk about Ethereum now, because I have a couple more. I think the Ethereum part of today's show might be a little bit longer, so I want to leave time for it. Um, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, today is indeed the deadline for the Hegota headliner proposals. We have 4 headliner proposals in the running already. So FOCIL is the fourth, is one of the 4 Hegota H-star EIPs, headliner EIPs, and the other 3 were discussed on last Thursday's Ethereum developer call. If you want the detailed kind of summary on the discussions around any of these proposals that happened on these ACD calls, I do cover the Ethereum developer calls as well, in addition to the Bitcoin developer ones. And so you can always find those call notes on my Substack, which I'll link in today's show notes. I want to give a quick overview about the features that are in the running for Hegota. And also to take a little bit of a step back. So Ethereum just did a pretty major network-wide upgrade, pretty unprecedentedly large. That's not a word, but it was an unprecedented upgrade because of how big it was, how many EIPs it activated. That happened in December. It was Fusaka. Is that what it's called? I have a really bad memory, but there was the upgrade. I think it was the Fusaka upgrade that implemented Pyramid and a bunch of other code changes that went live in December. And the next one that developers are trying to ship is called Glamsterdam. That is the one developers are trying to activate maybe around mid-June, July, this time, around that time of year. And H-star, Hegota, is the fork after Glamsterdam. And that is the one that developers are now discussing for what are the major features that should be included into Hegota. For Glamsterdam, the major features have already been figured out. Developers are still scoping out kind of the other parts, the other features for the Glamsterdam upgrade. They haven't quite finalized that yet. But in order to continue to not be a blocker on Ethereum development, and in a desire to speed up development as much as possible and create parallel workflows, the work for the Hegota upgrade is now starting. And these are the 4 features that are in the running for Hegota. So the first one is EIP 8105. It's the Universal Enshrined Encrypted Mempool. This is a feature that will basically introduce an in-protocol mechanism for encrypting user transactions that are submitted to the public mempool and protecting them from front-running, sandwich attacks, and censorship. So there are several different services that Ethereum users can use, be it directly through your wallet, like MetaMask, or through more custom features that various DeFi applications might be able to offer you, like CowSwap, or the products and services coming out of Flashbots. Users can send their transactions to Ethereum via a private mempool that protects their transaction from being seen by searchers. These specialized kind of users that are actively looking at the public mempool to see if there are any transactions they could potentially try and front run, or see if there's any way they can extract a little bit more value from knowing what a pending transaction in the Ethereum mempool is. And to prevent user transactions, especially the ones that are DeFi related, that are going to interact with financial applications built on Ethereum, there's a desire to bring those third-party services that encrypt user transactions and create an in-protocol mechanism for encrypting user transactions. And this will ensure that users don't have to rely on private mempools, don't have to rely on these third-party services to have to have privacy with their transactions. So that's EIP 8105. Pretty interesting. Honestly, all four of these are pretty interesting. The next one is EIP 8141, frame transaction. This was a transaction that does a couple of different things. It introduces a new transaction that will allow Ethereum accounts to define and interpret um, signature schemes of any cryptographic system. So not just the public private key um, signatures that Ethereum users might now be very used to. It's the ECDSA elliptic curve digital signature algorithm. Um, it's quite finicky, I would say, to most Web2 users. It's not um, uh, you got like a seed phrase, and there's various ways in which you can sign off on a transaction that if you kind of fat finger or have some kind of uh, any kind of user error, it's prone to user error. And so many people who aren't familiar with owning their own private keys, signing off with a private key, will generally just use a different custodian to take care of their holdings of Ethereum or their Ethereum accounts. They'll use kind of third-party services and intermediaries to ensure that, well, maybe I can just use like a regular username and password. And if I forget that password, then I'll have an intermediary to still be able to recover my account because I'm not the one directly responsible for the public private key management of my account. But with EIP 8141, there's going to be new transactions that will allow Ethereum accounts to define really and interpret signature schemes that are from any kind of cryptographic system. And that's going to open up what developers call full account abstraction. And that just allows far more flexibility in the ways in which users can set up and access their Ethereum accounts directly without having to go through, say, a custodian that manages specifically your ECDSA, like public or private key pairs for you. It would also, the other major benefit that I want to mention around this EIP and that was brought up during last Thursday's meeting is that it would prepare Ethereum accounts to be flexible towards new post-quantum secure cryptography. So it's not just the kind of cryptographic signatures that would make Ethereum accounts more Web2 friendly. It's also forward-looking to various cryptography that would be considered post-quantum secure, and with this EIP, just allow developers and users to just have more flexibility around what kind of cryptography they use to secure accounts and sign off on transactions. So that's EIP 8141. The third one, EIP 7807, is SSC execution blocks. This is a proposal for creating a unified block representation across Ethereum's consensus layer and execution layer protocols. So both of these protocols right now have different data serialization formats. The execution layer, I believe, which is the protocol that Ethereum developers have been working on and evolving and finagling around with since 2015, since the Ethereum blockchain first launched. They're using a block data serialization format called RLP, and the consensus layer, which was launched in 2020, it was the protocol that developers newly engineered to swap out Ethereum's consensus algorithm from proof of work to proof of stake. This consensus layer protocol has an updated data serialization scheme called SSC. And so when the merge happened, making Ethereum a proof of stake blockchain, but also merging together these two protocols, developers had to create quite a bit of mechanisms for these two layers to communicate with one another. And EIP 7807 would update data serialization format for the execution layer, particularly fully, so that all of these protocols, both of these protocols, I should say, are fully SSE zified, and that would enable just more efficient and simpler communication, reasoning about communication between the two layers. So it's an EIP that developers have been wanting to do and have been discussing for several years now, ever since the Beacon chain really launched, which is an alternative name for Ethereum's consensus layer. But they haven't quite gotten around to it, and because there's always been more pressing or flashy priorities that developers could pursue, and this is one of those like maintenance upgrades that that have always been falling on the wayside, always deprioritized in prior upgrades. And it's been suggested yet again for the H star fork. So that's EIP 7807. And last but not least, as I mentioned, FOCIL. I think I've talked about this EIP before on the show, but at a high level, it's a mechanism that it introduces a mechanism that will prevent layer one protocol level censorship from occurring on chain. And it basically creates like a list of required transactions that must be included into a block that's generated by the set of Ethereum validators. Ethereum's block proposers. And the idea is that right now, the block proposers, validators, most of them are outsourcing the work of including transactions into a block to a third party, the block builders. And these block builders are a much smaller group of entities. I believe I saw a tweet from Ethereum Foundation, one of the team leads in the Ethereum Foundation, Tony, who said that one block builder is accounting for something crazy like 50% of blocks being built on Ethereum. So a much more centralized group of actors right now are responsible for including transactions in a block. And this EIP would ensure that the power to include transactions in a block and to a block goes back into the hands of Ethereum's validator set. Validators, the reason why they outsource it to builders is because builders are these specialized actors that can um, that are trying to reorder transactions within a block to extract more value out of the transactions. And validators, they're not highly trained. They don't have the specialized algorithms to do that. And so basically validators get a cut of whatever the builders are making, which is the dynamic of why validators use builders. But through this EIP, validators would be randomly selected at every single epoch. A subset of them would be randomly selected by the protocol at every block to generate an inclusion list. So a list of transactions that must be included into the next block of Ethereum. And those transactions are transactions they've just randomly selected from the public mempool. And the validators would communicate that list to the builder, and the builder would have to include those transactions. So it's not like it solves the problem of MEV, like the reordering of transactions for additional value, but it does ensure that builders cannot intentionally censor transactions that are being submitted into the public mempool of Ethereum. So that is all four EIPs, all four headliners that are currently battling it out in the Hegota headliner games. In my view, so FOCIL had quite a bit of support from developers when they were discussing it for the Glamstram upgrade. So I believe that there's still quite a bit of support for seeing from developers to see FOCIL headline this one, H star fork. EIP 8141, the frame transaction one that I mentioned, that one got strong support from none other than Vitalik, one of the co-founders of Ethereum. So that's got to count for something. So in my view, I would say that those two are probably the front runners for the headliner selections for the H star fork so far. But today is the deadline. So who knows? There might be some last minute proposals that are submitted. If there's any Ethereum stakeholders that are listening to this podcast and want to submit new proposals for consideration by the Ethereum community, please do so today, because today is the day when those when developers will formally start discussing which of the set that have been proposed should be deprioritized, and which ones they should start planning for and implementing for the H star fork. I have one note that I want to share with the EIP champions for the H star fork, which I shared on my Twitter, and also to the subscribers in the Telegram chat. And that's just to note that there's still ongoing development happening for Glamsterdam. As I mentioned, Glamsterdam is the next immediate fork that developers are trying to ship onto Ethereum. The headliners for Glamsterdam are Enshrined Proposer Builder Separation, EPBS, and BALS, Block Level Access Lists. And block level access lists developers have scoped out quite a bit. There's the implementation work for block level access lists is progressing well, and there haven't been too many unexpected surprises. With EPBS, I would say the development work for EPBS is still quite a bit a ways in the early stages. There's been pretty major changes in specifications due to ongoing issues and unexpected changes that have happened in the way developers are thinking about what is the purpose and the goal of EPBS. And while they have settled on a good starting point for the EPBS feature, um, there's still quite a bit of work to be done on it, which is why it's important to note that changes in Glamsterdam's fork scope uh, could impact the timeline for Glamsterdam, i.e., could potentially delay when Glamsterdam gets activated, which would then have a second order effect on Hegota and the H star fork. It could impact thereafter the H star fork's scope as well as its timeline. Recall that with prior upgrades, for example, the Pectra upgrade that happened in Ethereum's history, when that upgrade was being planned, there was an intent by Ethereum developers to have the upgrade after Pectra be focused on a feature called Verkle. But due to unexpected difficulties with the Pectra upgrade, some overflow code changes out of Pectra were actually pushed into the next immediate fork. And then the Verkle feature, developers decided with more time, over the course of just more time thinking about it, that it wasn't a good feature to prioritize in the Ethereum development roadmap at all. So while it's true that Ethereum developers, especially under the leadership of the new Ethereum Foundation that was installed early last year, developers are focused and committed to trying to make Ethereum development and its timeline and its processes more credible, more formalized, more organized. At the end of the day, they're still developing and working on a blockchain that is decentralized, that is Ethereum, where every single day, billions of dollars are being held on this protocol, staked on this protocol, transferred or tokenized. Um, there's quite a few it's not easy, I guess, to like know all the variables at play for when this type of a protocol can upgrade and exactly what is necessary to prioritize for it, especially thinking years out from today what development could look like. There are no guarantees when it comes to the upgrade process of a protocol like Ethereum, because there's no one entity that controls Ethereum. While there are a lot of good intents and planning being done to ensure that various upgrades happen on the timelines that have been suggested, there are no guarantees. And it's important that EIP champions and anyone participating in the Ethereum governance process be aware of that going in. This is just to avoid, I guess, like uh, frustration when unexpected things change what developers decide about an upgrade later into the governance process, or when stakeholders realize that, oh, this is an upgrade that I anticipated would go live. This is a feature that I expected to go live on Ethereum in June, but it's now going to go live much later than that. Um, there are good reasons for why certain code changes get delayed, for why governance sometimes becomes messy. That's because there's a lot of stakeholders involved that all collectively kind of own this protocol that is Ethereum. And Ethereum is quite a complex protocol, especially when compared to the Bitcoin protocol. And so that also makes it doubly challenging and risky uh, anytime there's major features being added to it, which at the rate developers are going and the way that these upgrades are happening on Ethereum now, there's an attempt to push at least two major features onto Ethereum for every upgrade. Um, I didn't mention that with the Hegota headliners, but developers are ideally looking for one consensus layer major feature and one execution layer major feature. And the all four of these are pretty. They're major ones for the execution layer. I haven't seen too many that are primarily focused on the consensus layer. But again, who knows? Maybe there's going to be more proposals coming in today. Again, for any of my listeners, if you have a proposal for that you think will be an important one for developers to prioritize in the next, say, year or so, um, today's the day to do it and to propose it on any of the Ethereum discussion forums, be it Ethereum Magicians. Ethereum Magicians is I think the best way to do it, actually. So I'll link the Ethereum Magicians Hegota kind of post for anyone that's interested in today's show notes. So yes, there you have it. I thank you for coming to join another Ready for Merge show. You are now officially caught up on the code changes that are ready for merge in Bitcoin and Ethereum, or nearing to be ready for merge in Bitcoin and Ethereum. For next week's show, I want to give everyone a heads up that it's going to be a little bit different from today's. It's going to be a guest episode featuring another Bitcoin developer who goes by the name Floppy. He has been actively trying to push for activation of a opcode, a new feature on Ethereum called opctv, the soft fork upgrade. I thought that was kind of interesting, the way that he's going about doing it, because there's other sections of the Bitcoin community that are also trying to activate their own soft forks in a very different manner. So you're gonna be hearing from Floppy next week. He'll be the third Bitcoin developer that I introduce on the show. And don't worry, I've got plans to bring back Ethereum developers onto the show as well. Hopefully even get some episodes on this show with both Bitcoin developers and Ethereum developers discussing various topics of mutual interest with one another. Yeah, so next week's will be the guest episode, and then the week following, I'll be back with another biweekly brief for you on Bitcoin and Ethereum protocol development. So yes, thanks again for listening. If you liked the episode today, please be sure to like, subscribe, share it with a friend if you think they might be interested in this kind of info too. Until next time, bye everyone.